The following review contains significant plot spoilers. Please watch at your own risk.
Bring him in! Take the load!
No, please go home. I'm very
Let's go, James! Come along, James! Your hat. Thank you.
License to Kill is the 16th official Bond film and was released in 1989, starring Timothy Dalton in his last outing as the suave secret agent 007. The film starts off with the usual gun barrel, although this time the music has been changed dramatically. That doesn't mean that it's bad, because it isn't. You can tell this is going to be a different kind of Bond film just from the gun barrel music. It sounds much more epic. After that, we jump right into the pre-title sequence, which shows Bond and Felix Leiter, played by David Hedison, on their way to Leiter's wedding. David Hedison previously played Felix Leiter in 1973's Live and Let Die, making him the first actor in the franchise to reprise the role. Anyways, they are interrupted when a wanted drug lord, Franz Sanchez, played by Robert DeVee, shows up in the Bahamas. Bond and Leiter can't give up this opportunity, so they go there along with a couple DEA agents to apprehend him. Bond and Leiter end up capturing him in a cool sequence where Bond attaches a hook and a cord to Sanchez's plane, which ends up being towed in the air by a helicopter. If you've seen The Dark Knight Rises, you will recognize this idea, since they kind of reused it in the opening for that film as well. Afterwards, Bond and Leiter parachute down to the wedding, where we get the title song of the film, sung by Gladys Knight. This song is very reminiscent of Goldfinger, and is a pretty decent song, I must say. After the song, we get back to the wedding celebrations, where Felix and his wife, Della, played by Priscilla Barnes, gives Bond a lighter. Felix Leiter gives Bond a lighter. Get it? Anyway, enough of my bad jokes. The film then shifts where we see Sanchez bribe his way out of captivity thanks to the help of a corrupt DEA agent named Ed Killefer. After this, one of Sanchez's henchmen, Dario, played by a very young Benicio del Toro, captures Felix and also rapes and kills Della. Felix is later maimed by a shark and returned to his house. Bond goes to Felix's house and finds him still alive but seriously wounded, missing a leg and some of an arm. Bond becomes enraged and swears to take his revenge on Sanchez. This is where this film differs from previous ones. License to Kill is by far the most darkest and violent Bond film in the franchise, even to this day, and that is mostly because of this revenge plot that we get. Anyways, back to the synopsis. Bond does some snooping around with his friend Sharky, played by Frank McRae, and kills Killefer by pushing him into the same tank that Felix was maimed in. Sometime after this, Bond meets a very angry M, who orders him to take an assignment in Istanbul and to stop worrying about his personal vendetta. Bond refuses and resigns, but M suspends Bond instead and revokes his license to kill. Bond then escapes and becomes a rogue agent. This is a pretty cool concept that we haven't seen before, a very bitter, pissed-off rogue Bond, but it works tremendously well in this film. Bond does some more snooping and runs into one of Sanchez's henchmen, Milton Crest, played by Anthony Zerbe, aboard his ship the Wavecrest. Bond foils Sanchez's latest drug shipment, stealing $5 million in the process, and later recruits Pam Bouvier, an ex-CIA agent slash pilot, played by Carey Lowell. The two travel to a fictional place called Isthmus City, which is located in South America, where Bond finds his way into Sanchez's employment by posing as an assassin looking for work. When Bond later attempts to assassinate Sanchez with some goodies that he obtained from Q, a bunch of Hong Kong narcotics agents foil his attempt and take him to a warehouse. An MI6 agent shows up with orders to apprehend Bond, dead or alive. Bond is about to be sedated and sent back to England when Sanchez and his men show up and kill everyone except for Bond. Bond is taken to Sanchez's estate as a welcome guest and gives Sanchez some false information about a possible betrayal with one of his men. With the help of Pam, Q, and Sanchez's girlfriend Lupe Lamora, played by Talisa Soto, Bond frames Crest by placing the $5 million he stole into the hyperbaric chamber on board the Wavecrest. An angry Sanchez puts Crest in the chamber and rapidly depressurizes it, brutally killing him in a very gory scene. After this, Sanchez places Bond in his inner circle due to his perceived loyalty. The next day, Sanchez takes Bond to his base where the drugs are made. Bond learns that Sanchez's scientists can dissolve cocaine in petrol and then sell it disguised as fuel to Asian drug dealers. During Sanchez's presentation to some potential Asian customers, Dario discovers Bond and betrays him to Sanchez. Bond starts a huge fire but is captured and placed on a conveyor belt that could potentially drop him into a cocaine shredder. Luckily, Pam shows up and distracts Dario, and Bond pulls him down into the shredder, killing him rather brutally. Bond starts a huge fire but is captured and placed on a conveyor belt that could potentially drop him into a cocaine shredder. Luckily, Pam shows up and distracts Dario, and Bond pulls him down into the shredder, killing him rather brutally. Sanchez flees with 4 cocaine-filled tankers as Bond and Pam pursue him. A very long but awesome and intense chase sequence begins, and 3 of the 4 tankers end up getting destroyed. Sanchez attacks Bond aboard the last one, which ends up losing control and crashing down a hillside. Soaked in petrol from the leaking tanker, Sanchez is about to kill Bond with a machete, when Bond asks him very coldly, "Don't you want to know why?" Bond pulls out the lighter given to him by Felix and Della, which has their names engraved into it, and sets Sanchez on fire, killing him. After this, there's a nice solemn moment with a sad-looking Bond, who realizes that he has finally gotten revenge. The film closes on a good note, which shows a recovering Felix Leiter and M offering Bond his job back. The film comes to an end with Bond and Pam sharing a romantic evening together at a party. Timothy Dalton gives a very hard-edged performance in this film, and if you thought he was serious in The Living Daylights, then you haven't seen anything yet. I know a lot of Bond fans hate Dalton because he seems pissed off all the time, but I think he's just giving a serious and realistic performance here. Most of the one-liners are absent, playing to Dalton's strengths, and even though this isn't a classic Bond film like The Living Daylights, it's still on the same level in a different and unique way. I still think today that what if Timothy Dalton had stuck around for the next Bond film? What would it have been like? If I had to name the worst moment in the Bond timeline and the single most missed opportunity, it would have to be Dalton not returning to the role. Dalton is often regarded by many people as being forgotten, along with Lazenby, and criticized for not offering any solid Bond films. To me, however, he offered 2 exceptional Bond films, and definitely left his mark on the franchise. The main villain of this film is Franz Sanchez, played by Robert Davi. After the average Bond villains in the previous film, we get one who is charismatic, dangerous, and brutal. Sanchez has a defining characteristic, and that is loyalty. He often says in the film how loyalty is more important than money, and so on. Overall, Sanchez is definitely one of the better villains in the series, and makes my top 10 villains list with ease. M, Q, and Moneypenny return, being played by Robert Brown, Desmond Llewellyn, and Caroline Bliss, respectively. Bliss gets one measly scene in the whole film and ends up looking like a complete joke, which is kinda sad. M gets a little character development in the film, which is nice. The best part is Q and the amount of screen time he gets in this one. Not only does he provide the gadgets, but he also helps Bond out in the field. This would be Robert Brown and Caroline Bliss's last films as M and Moneypenny, but Llewellyn would return as Q for the 15th time in the next film. Our allies this time include Sharky and of course Felix Leiter. Sharky is a very likable ally, but follows the same trend as previous likable allies, meaning that he gets killed off in the film. Felix Leiter returns being played by David Hedison, who gives a great performance. It helps the audience feel for his demise since he had previously played the role before, but if he had been Felix Leiter in every film, it would have had a much bigger impact. There is a crapload of henchmen in this film, all of who are shown to have some importance, so I'll go over them real quick. We got Dario, who is presumed to be Sanchez's son or something of the like. Milton Crest, who is a shifty-looking guy. Colonel Heller, Sanchez's head of security. Truman Lodge, Sanchez's financial advisor. Perez and Braun, Sanchez's two muscle men. And Professor Joe Butcher, a television evangelist who brings in money for Sanchez. Crest, Heller, and Truman Lodge, oddly enough, are all killed by Sanchez himself when he questions their loyalty. Professor Joe provides pretty much the only comedy relief in the film and doesn't get killed unlike the rest of the people working for Sanchez. He doesn't necessarily fit in the film too well, though. We get two Bond girls in this film, Pam Bouvier and Lupe Lamora. Carrie Lowell gives a great performance as one of the few American Bond girls and shows that her character can hold her own. Talisa Soto, on the other hand, can't act her way out of a paper bag. She also doesn't provide much in the film besides being the abused girlfriend of Sanchez. That, and I guess she looks kinda decent. Lowell is definitely the better actress and more good-looking, though. John Glenn returns yet again for his last time as a Bond director and manages to do a good job with the film despite the low budget and overall less expensive look of the film. Michael Kamen joins the crew and delivers an alright score that is reminiscent of Miami Vice or something. It's not the best, but it works with the film. The villain's scheme is nothing fantastic this time around, and is overall too similar to the previous film's scheme with the drugs and all that. The main plot, however, with Bond wanting to get revenge for his best friend Felix, is very new and different for a Bond film. I always think of this film as the unofficial sequel to On Her Majesty's Secret Service that we didn't get. Instead of Bond's wife getting killed, it's Felix's, and Bond finds it his responsibility to bring justice to the situation. There's also a very nice touch with Bond refusing to catch Della's garter, and Felix explaining to her that Bond was married once a long time ago. It brings some much-needed continuity to the series and is a touching moment. The action sequences are also really good in this film. There's a short underwater fight that reminds me of Thunderball, and who can forget the epic finale with the huge tanker chase. There's a fight scene in a bar that is pretty silly, though. I should also mention that this film was originally rated R, but was cut down to a PG-13. This is definitely the bloodiest Bond film. We get an exploding head, a guy getting skewered to death in a shredder, a guy getting lit on fire, and of course multiple maimings. These scenes make this Bond film stand out as a no-nonsense adventure with realistic deaths. Well, except for maybe the exploding head. I don't know if that could actually happen in real life from depressurization or not. The locations in this film are nothing too special. All we get is mostly Mexico due to the budget issues with the film. Also worth mentioning is that this film is the least successful Bond film in the US financially, only getting $34.6 million. There were also issues with promotional material, with the title of the film being changed from License Revoked to License to Kill at the end of production. License to Kill is a jarring but unique change after The Living Daylights. I have always been a fan of this film, but after re-watching it this week, I realized how awesome and badass Timothy Dalton is, and I am actually considering him as my favorite Bond above Connery. This franchise desperately needed a film like this, and it came along at the right moment. I find it really hard to compare this one with The Living Daylights, but overall I'd say they are both pretty much equal. This film definitely earns points for originality, though. I highly recommend giving this film a watch for those who haven't already. Any action movie fan will surely love this one. I give License to Kill a 9 out of 10. And now for my likes and dislikes, starting with my likes. The revenge plot is a relatively rare idea in the Bond franchise, and done correctly this time, unlike in Diamonds Are Forever. Robert DeVee as Franz Sanchez makes a great and memorable villain. Carrie Lowell as Pam Bouvier makes a strong and independent Bond girl who doesn't need to be saved. Desmond Llewellyn gets a lot more screen time as Q, which is always a plus. And finally, Timothy Dalton. Some of his lines in this film are classic, like when he tells the MI6 agent to piss off. And now for my dislikes. Talisa Soto as Lupe Lamora makes a weak Bond girl and mostly forgettable. The lack of different locations and cheap budget makes this film look noticeably different. Wayne Newton as Professor Joe Butcher provides some cheap comedy relief and feels out of place in an otherwise serious film. The villain's scheme is not the greatest and too similar to the one in the previous film. And lastly, the brawl in the bar was a bit silly and unnecessary in my opinion. Sadly, Timothy Dalton will not return as James Bond. However, his replacement is still a worthy successor and would soon prove to be the Bond of the 90s. Stay tuned for next week when we look at what is possibly one of the most loved films in the franchise. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.